Hello, everyone, and welcome to 7 Continents, One Story.
Hi there. So glad you're joining us today.
Hey everyone, great to have you here.
I'm Nils, professor of history from Sweden.
I'm Céline, joining you from Edinburgh, Scotland.
And I'm Ethan, calling in from Malta.
Together, we explore incredible stories from history across all 7 continents.
Every episode brings you a new journey through time.
From ancient civilizations to modern moments that changed everything.
So let's begin.
You know, I was reading about this just a few weeks ago, and I genuinely couldn't stop thinking about it. Everything I thought I knew about the Amazon was wrong. I'm talking about the Amazon rainforest, that vast, green, impossibly dense wilderness in South America. For most of my life, and I suspect for most of yours, it existed in the imagination as something ancient and untouched, a place humans passed through but never truly settled. And then, in January of 2024, a paper landed in the journal Science that rewrote that story completely.
Hidden beneath that forest canopy, invisible from the ground, hidden from every aerial photograph ever taken, there were cities, Céline, actual cities, and they had been there for 2,500 years.
Okay, 2,500 years. That is like before the Roman Empire. Wait, how old is that exactly?
500 BCE. So when the Kilamope people were building their first platforms in the Upano Valley of Ecuador, the Romans were just figuring out that whole republic idea. Athens was inventing democracy. The world was young, and here, in the western Amazon, people were building roads.
And we had absolutely no idea, until now.
And we are so lucky today because we have with us the person who found them, the archaeologist who spent 30 years working in this valley, who was told repeatedly that he was wasting his time, and who turned out to be completely and utterly right. Dr. Stéphen Rostain is Director of Research at France's National Center for Scientific Research, the CNRS. He is the lead author of the landmark 2024 paper in Science titled 2,000 Years of Garden Urbanism in the Upper Amazon. Welcome to 7 Continents, One Story, Dr. Rostain.
Thank you so much. It is a real pleasure. And yes, 30 years. I must say, the moment I saw those LiDAR images for the first time, all 30 years made complete sense. Everything we had suspected, everything. It was right there on the screen. Incredible.
Okay, I have to ask, what was that moment actually like? Like, you're sitting there and the images come up. What do you see? What do you feel?
You know, it is difficult to describe. We received the processed LiDAR data in 2020, 5 years after the survey was actually flown, because of bureaucratic complications, let us say. So we had been waiting, and then the images loaded, and I could not speak. My colleagues were the same. We were looking at a complete web of roads, straight roads, cutting through the forest in lines that nature does not produce, and platforms, hundreds, then thousands, 15 urban centers, all connected, all organized. I have spent 30 years in that valley, and I had no idea it was this big.
That must have been extraordinary.
I cried a little, I will admit that.
And rightfully so. Let me share something I have here on my desk today, a fragment of Kilamope pottery. A replica, of course, but modeled on vessels recovered from the Upano Valley platforms. It's ceramic, painted in red cream geometric lines, cool and slightly rough to the touch. 2,500 years old in origin. When I hold this, I think about the hands that made it. The person who painted those lines, who drank from a vessel like this, probably filled with chicha, the traditional maize beer, at a communal feast in one of Stephen's cities.
A maize beer party in an Amazon city. I mean, that is so cool.
This is exactly right. The chicha. We find it in the chemical residues inside the large ceramic storage jars. These were social gatherings, communal feasting. The people of the Upano Valley were not just surviving, they were celebrating. They had culture, ritual, community, a full human life.
Dr. Rostain, take us back to the beginning. Why the Upano Valley? What drew you there in the first place? Because in the 1990s, the Amazon was not exactly considered promising territory for discovering urban civilizations.
No, it was not. In fact, many of my colleagues were very politely discouraging. The prevailing view, strongly influenced by the work of Betty Meggers in the 1970s, was that the Amazon was too poor, too leached, too difficult an environment to support complex societies. The soil was simply not rich enough for the intensive agriculture that cities require. The Amazon, they said, was a counterfeit paradise.
A counterfeit paradise. That's a phrase that stuck around for a long time, didn't it?
For decades. And I understood the argument, but I had read the earlier work, the excavations by a Jesuit priest called Pedro Porras in the Upano Valley in the 1970s and 80s. He had noticed the mounds. He had published a paper calling them a lost city. And almost nobody took it seriously. But I looked at his photographs and I thought, those are not natural formations. Those are built structures. So I went.
Wait, a priest found them first?
Yes. Father Pedro Porras was a Jesuit archaeologist at the Pontifical Catholic University of Ecuador. He was shown the mounds by a colleague in the 1970s, and he excavated them and published his findings. He deserves credit that he rarely receives. The 2024 media frenzy treated everything as brand new. It was not. Pedro Porras saw these mounds first. Remember his name?
Remember Pedro Porras? The priest who saw it first.
And you built on his work. You arrived in the 1990s with a multidisciplinary team. Archaeologists, geoscientists, archaeobotanists. What did you find through traditional excavation before LiDAR even existed as a practical tool?
We found hundreds of mounds, earthen platforms constructed from compacted soil, arranged in clusters around central plazas. The largest of the sites, we called them Sangai and Kilamope, after the local geography and the cultural traditions we identified. Those had remarkable densities of platforms, more than 100 platforms per square kilometre in some areas. We found pottery of extraordinary quality and variety, painted geometric designs, large storage jars, figurines. We confirmed the chicha residues I mentioned. We found evidence of sophisticated agricultural management. We were sure that this was a significant complex society, but the full picture we could not see.
So it's like you had all the pieces of a puzzle but no picture on the box to work from.
That is exactly it. Exactly. You had one platform here, one platform there, a road fragment. You could walk for an hour through the jungle and see two things. LiDAR let us see everything at once.
Which brings us to the technology. Ethan, you had a question about how LiDAR actually works.
Yeah, because from the outside it sounds kind of like magic. Like, how do you see through a forest with a laser? Is it like an X-ray of the jungle?
That is actually a pretty good analogy. Dr. Rostain, you explain it better than anyone.
Yes, it is quite beautiful actually. The physics of it. You fly an aircraft over the forest. The aircraft carries a LiDAR sensor, a laser system that fires millions of pulses downward very rapidly. Most of those pulses hit the canopy and bounce back. But some, because the canopy is never perfectly solid, some pulses slip through the gaps, through a gap between two branches, down, down, down through the understory. And they hit the ground and they bounce back. The sensor records the time it takes each pulse to return, and from billions of time measurements, a computer builds a three-dimensional model of everything the laser touched. The canopy, the branches, the ground. Then you write a program to strip away all the canopy returns, and what you have left is a perfect map of the bare earth. Every hill, every ditch, every platform, every road, every canal, revealed.
So you basically digitally removed an entire forest.
Digitally removed an entire forest, yes. And underneath was a city. Cities, rather. 15 of them.
I keep coming back to something. This forest, this supposedly pristine, empty Amazon, had been hiding 15 urban centers for 2,500 years. How does that happen? How does nobody find this?
Because the Amazon is vast. Because the tree canopy is impenetrable from above to the naked eye. Because ground survey in a tropical rainforest is extraordinarily slow and laborious. You can spend weeks mapping what LiDAR maps in a single flight, and because here's the critical reason, scholars were not looking for cities. The prevailing assumption was that cities could not exist there.
This is the key point. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The Amazon was assumed to be empty because nobody had the tools to look properly, and because the intellectual framework said it should be empty. We had the wrong framework, and LiDAR gave us the right eyes.
Let me ask about that framework specifically. The empty Amazon assumption, because I grew up with that idea. I think most people in Europe and North America did. Where did it come from?
It came from several places, partly from the genuine scientific observation that the Amazon basin has notoriously poor acidic soils, what geologists call oxysols. The heavy tropical rainfall leaches nutrients downward, away from the root zone. Early agricultural scientists argued that these soils simply could not support large populations. Enter Betty Meggers in her 1971 book, Amazonia, Man and Culture in a Counterfeit Paradise. She made that argument with real scientific rigor, and it stuck.
But there was already pushback by the 1990s, wasn't there?
Absolutely. The crucial countervoice was Anna Roosevelt Finastase, an archaeologist at the Field Museum in Chicago. Her 1991 study of Marajo Island at the mouth of the Amazon showed compelling evidence of a mound-building society that had supported over 100,000 people. Roosevelt argued that indigenous Amazonians had developed extraordinarily sophisticated strategies for managing tropical landscapes, strategies that were simply not visible to scholars trained to look for stone monuments and writing systems. She was right, and the Upano Valley is the most powerful confirmation of her argument yet produced.
Anna Roosevelt was fighting an institutional battle for years. I remember, even in the 1990s, the pushback she faced. And now? Now we cannot argue anymore. The cities are there. The roads are there. The evidence is undeniable.
So, just to make sure I've got this right, for most of the 20th century, the scientific community basically said the Amazon was too poor to support cities. And indigenous people in the Amazon had been saying, actually, our ancestors built amazing things here for forever.
Yes, and this is something I feel deeply. The knowledge was never completely lost. The indigenous communities of the Amazon, the Shuar people in the Upano Valley today, other communities across the basin, they have always known their landscape is not empty. They have stories, traditions, names for places. They have been caretakers of these vestiges for generations. What we did with LiDAR was give the outside world a way to see what local people already understood.
That is a really important thing to say.
And on that note, we are going to pause here. When we come back, what exactly did the LiDAR reveal? Roads that stretched for 25 kilometers, agricultural systems that fed tens of thousands of people, and a civilization that was building urban centers when Rome was still a small river town. Stay with us. Welcome back to 7 Continents, One Story. We are joined by Dr. Stéphen Rostain of France's CNRS, the lead researcher behind the discovery of the Upano Valley urban complex, and Dr. Rostain. I want to get into the detail now, because when people hear ancient Amazon cities, they may imagine something modest, a few huts, a clearing. What does this complex actually look like at scale?
Let me take you there. Imagine you're standing in the Upano Valley in Ecuador on the eastern flank of the Andes, around 400 meters above sea level. The Sangay volcano, one of the most continuously active volcanoes in the world, rises directly to your south. The forest is dense, humid, full of sound. You cannot see far in any direction. But if you could strip away that forest, if you had our LiDAR view, you would see something that would stop you completely. 15 urban centers arranged across 300 square kilometers of valley floor and foothills. Each one a cluster of earthen platforms, some small, some monumental, arranged around central plazas. Between the centers, straight roads cut through the landscape like ruled lines on a page. And between those roads, hundreds of hectares of carefully managed agricultural fields, drainage ditches, and terraces carved into the hillsides.
300 square kilometers. What is that in terms of something I can picture?
It's roughly the size of the city of Edinburgh, the whole city covered in interconnected settlements.
Perfect comparison.
Okay. Edinburgh, sized Amazon city, built 2,500 years ago. No stone, no writing, just earth, roads, and agriculture. And nobody knew.
Nobody knew the full scale. No. And I want to emphasize, these are not primitive structures. The platforms are precisely constructed. Some of them rise 3 or 4 meters in height. They are stable after 2,500 years. The plazas between them are leveled. The roads are engineered. They are raised above the surrounding terrain on embankments to manage the wet season flooding. The widest roads are 10 meters across. Some road sections run perfectly straight for 25 kilometers.
25 kilometers of straight road through a tropical forest.
Straight as a ruler. This requires surveying. This requires planning. This requires a society with the institutional capacity to mobilize labor across a large geographic area and maintain standards of construction over time. You do not build a 25-kilometer straight road by accident.
And this is where I think the textbooks really are going to have to change. Because I was taught, and I think a lot of people were taught, that the kind of organized, monumental engineering you associate with ancient civilizations was something that happened in the Middle East, in Greece, in China, not in the Amazon.
And this is the most important lesson of Upano. Complexity is not a European or Near Eastern invention. It is a human impulse. Wherever people settled, wherever they had the resources and the organization, they built. They planned, they connected. The Amazon was no different. The form was different, the garden urbanism form, rather than the stone city form, but the impulse, the achievement, the sophistication, absolutely comparable.
Tell us about this term, garden urbanism, because it is a concept your team coined, and I think it is central to understanding what makes Upano distinctive.
Yes. If you think of a European ancient city, Rome, Athens, Babylon, you think of a dense urban core, walls, temples, markets, and then outside the walls, farmland. A clear separation between the urban and the agricultural. The Upano Valley is completely different. The residential platforms, the communal plazas, the ceremonial mounds, they are interwoven with the agricultural fields. The farming does not happen outside the city. The city happens inside the farming. The fields are not a backdrop. They are part of the urban fabric itself.
It's more like a living landscape, everything woven together.
Exactly. And we have not seen this anywhere else in the pre-Columbian Americas. It is genuinely unprecedented, which is why we needed a new term. Garden urbanism. An urban form organized around the garden, the field, the cultivation of the earth.
What were they actually growing? Like, what did an Upano Valley dinner look like?
A good question. They grew maize, corn, manioc, which you might know as cassava, sweet potato, beans, a diverse portfolio of crops. They also had access to the river and the forest for fish, game, and fruit. It was a rich diet by the standards of the ancient world. This agricultural surplus is what supported the urban population, which we estimate at its peak at perhaps 15,000 to 30,000 people across the 15 centers.
And the agricultural infrastructure itself, the drainage ditches, the raised fields, that is also visible in the LiDAR data?
Very clearly. Hundreds of hectares of raised field systems, fields elevated above the wet valley floor to prevent waterlogging during the rainy season, drainage canals running between plots, hillside terraces cut into the Andean slopes to capture the volcanic soils. This is sophisticated water management. This is an agricultural civilization.
Let me ask about dating, because this is where the claim about the oldest in Amazonia rests. How confident are you in those dates? How do you know it was 500 BCE?
This is exactly the right question. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. We are confident because we have multiple independent lines of evidence. First, radiocarbon dating. We have taken samples from organic material, charred wood, charcoal, seeds, embedded in the construction layers of the platforms. Multiple independent radiocarbon dates from multiple platforms consistently return dates, beginning around 500 BCE. This is not one date from one context. This is a pattern across many excavations. Second, stratigraphy. The sequence of layers within the platforms is consistent with a long occupation. The earliest construction phases are at the base. The later Upano culture phases are above. The volcanic ash layers from Sangai eruptions give us additional chronological markers. We can correlate them with known eruption dates. Third, the ceramic sequence. The pottery styles evolve in a consistent, trackable way through the occupation layers. The earliest ceramics are Kilamope style, painted geometric designs. The later ceramics are Upano style, a development of the same tradition. This stylistic evolution confirms the chronological sequence.
So when you say the Upano Valley complex predates any other known complex Amazonian society by over a millennium, that is a robust claim.
It is a robust claim. Yes, we are confident. The previous earliest known complex Amazonian society dated to around 500 CE. Upano begins at 500 BCE. That is 1,000 years earlier. 1,000 years.
That gap is extraordinary. That means for 1,000 years before any other complex society emerged in the Amazon, there were already cities here in the Upano Valley.
And what ended it? Like, what happened to all these people?
This is one of the questions we are still investigating. The most dramatic explanation, and it may have some truth, involves the Sangay volcano. Directly above the valley, erupting continuously, there are volcanic ash layers in the platform stratigraphy that correspond to significant eruption events. An earlier hypothesis proposed a catastrophic eruption around 400 to 600 CE that ended the civilization abruptly. But the picture is more complicated than that. Radiocarbon dates from different sites show different timelines. Some communities seem to have persisted on volcanic debris deposits even after major eruption events. The decline was probably gradual, a combination of volcanic pressure, perhaps changing climate, perhaps shifts in the broader regional political landscape. A volcano is dramatic, but history is usually more complex than a single dramatic event.
Let me make a comparison that I think will help our listeners. Stephen, in the year 500 BCE, when the Kilamope people were founding these urban centers, what was happening elsewhere in the world?
Well, in Rome, they had just expelled their kings and established the Republic. In Athens, Cleisthenes was founding democracy. The Persian Empire, under Darius the Iran, stretched from the Aegean to the Indus. In India, the Buddha was teaching. In China, Confucius was alive.
So the Upano Valley people were literally contemporaries of Confucius and the Buddha. That is mind-blowing.
They were contemporaries of the great urban and intellectual revolutions of the Iron Age. They were not isolated. They were part of a world of simultaneous human achievement, in different places, with different materials, speaking different languages, but all answering the same human impulse to build, to organize, to connect.
And this is where I always feel the emotion in history. These were real people. The person who painted the lines on that Kilamope ceramic vessel, the engineer who surveyed 25 kilometers of straight road through the forest, the farmer who dug the drainage ditches in the wet season. They lived full human lives, celebrated, struggled, loved, died, in a civilization that the outside world forgot for 2,000 years.
And we almost left it at that, almost never found it at all.
Almost, but we did find it. And now, it cannot be unfound. The story of the Upano Valley is part of human history now, permanently.
Dr. Rostain, who were these people culturally? Like the Kilamope and Upano cultures, do we know anything about what their society was like? Was there a king, a council? How were they organized?
This is the honest answer. We know some things, and we are uncertain about others. We know they were sedentary and agrarian. They stayed, they farmed, they built. We know from the scale of the road network and the consistency of platform construction across 15 urban centers that there was political coordination of some kind. You do not build this network without some form of regional governance, a chief, a council of elders, a network of allied communities. The most likely model is a chieftaincy, or a network of allied chieftaincies. But, and this is important, we have found no palaces, no single monumental tomb of a great ruler, no evidence of extreme wealth concentration. The platforms are varied in size, but none is overwhelmingly dominant. This may suggest a more dispersed power structure, governance through alliance and consensus rather than through centralized authority.
That actually sounds quite sophisticated in a different way. Not a pyramid builder top-down hierarchy, but something more networked.
Yes, and this may be another reason why the empty Amazon assumption persisted for so long. We were looking for a king's palace. We were looking for a pyramid. We were not looking for a networked society of allied communities organizing themselves through consensus and communal feasting. But that is a civilization too. That is a complex society. The form is different. The achievement is not less.
Coming up in our final act, Not Stanley's, what does this discovery change, not just for archaeology, but for the people who live in the Upano Valley today? The Shuar people, whose sacred river runs through this landscape, and our Choose Your Own History. You are Dr. Rostain. You have just received the most extraordinary data of your career. Do you believe your own eyes?
Welcome back to the final part of our conversation with Dr. Stéphen Rostain. We have been talking about one of the most remarkable archaeological discoveries of the 21st century, the Upano Valley urban complex of Amazonian Ecuador, 2,500 years old, hidden under the forest for 2 millennia. Dr. Rostain, I want to ask you directly, what does this change, not just for archaeology, but for how we understand human history?
It changes the story fundamentally. The dominant narrative of human civilization, which has been told primarily through the lens of European and Near Eastern history, has always placed the Amazon in the category of nature, not culture. The forest was the backdrop. The people were peripheral. Their societies were described as simple, fragile, temporary. The Upano Valley proves that is wrong. It proves that in the western Amazon, 2,500 years ago, human beings were building complex urban networks, engineering roads, managing agricultural landscapes at scale, and sustaining a civilization for 1,000 years. That is not peripheral, that is central to the story of human achievement.
And it raises a very important question. If this was possible in the Upano Valley, what else is out there? How much of the Amazon is still hiding?
A great deal. We surveyed 300 square kilometers. The Amazon basin is roughly 7 million square kilometers. We have surveyed a fraction of a fraction. I believe, and I say this with confidence, that the Upano Valley is not unique. It is perhaps the most dramatic example discovered so far, but there are other complexes out there. In the forest, under the canopy, waiting.
That is honestly kind of overwhelming to think about.
In the best possible way.
In the best possible way. Yes. We are at the beginning, not the end. Every new LiDAR survey opens a new window. The archaeology of the Amazon is being rewritten in real time.
Dr. Rostain. Let's talk about the people who live in this landscape today, the Shuar people. The Upano Valley is their home. When a discovery like this is announced to the world, what is their relationship to it? How do they respond?
This is something I feel very strongly about. The Shuar people, who regard the Upano River as sacred, who call it the River of Sacred Waterfalls, they are not simply bystanders to this discovery. They are the custodians of this landscape. They have cared for these mounds for generations. They have their own knowledge of this territory that predates any scientific survey. It is important to say clearly, the Shuar are not direct biological descendants of the Kilamope and Upano peoples. There is a gap of many centuries between the abandonment of the ancient sites and the documented presence of the Shuar in the valley. But the Shuar and related communities have been the stewards of this landscape for as long as we have any record. Their knowledge, their place names, their oral traditions, these are part of the heritage too.
And the reaction when the discovery became global news?
Mixed. On one hand, there was pride, enormous pride, that the world was finally acknowledging the sophistication of pre-Columbian Amazonian people. Indigenous scholars and communities across the region had been saying for years that their ancestors were builders, not just forest dwellers. Vindication is the word. On the other hand, real, legitimate concern, because global attention brings tourists. It brings treasure hunters and looters. Some of the mounds in the valley have already been damaged by agricultural expansion, cattle farming by non-indigenous settlers. The worry is that fame accelerates destruction rather than protection.
That's such a real tension, like you discover something incredible and suddenly the thing you discovered is in danger because of the discovery.
And who should be in charge of deciding what happens to these sites?
The communities who live there. Full stop. Any conservation plan, any heritage management strategy, any tourism development must be designed in full consultation with the Shuar people and other local communities. Not as an afterthought. As a first principle, this is their land, this is their heritage. We scientists are guests.
That is exactly the right framing. Thank you.
Dr. Rostain, I want to ask you something that I think will connect with a lot of our listeners who maybe don't know a lot about archaeology. You spent 30 years in this valley being told, more or less politely, that you were wasting your time. How did you keep going?
Stubbornness. Pure stubbornness. I have said publicly, I'm very stubborn, so I did it anyway. And it is true. When the institutional skepticism is significant, when your peers raise their eyebrows at conference presentations, you have two choices. You stop, or you continue and you get better evidence. I continued.
Science needs stubborn people sometimes.
It does, and the Amazon specifically needed stubborn people. Because the environment is difficult, fieldwork is hard, funding is uncertain, results come slowly. But underneath that difficulty is an extraordinary human story waiting to be told. Every one of those platforms was built by human hands. Every road was surveyed by human intelligence. The people who built the Upano Valley were brilliant. They deserve to be known.
And on that note, I want to try our choose your own history with you directly, Dr. Rostain, because this seems right.
The year is 2020. You have just received the first processed LiDAR images from the Upano Valley survey. You look at the screen. You see thousands of platforms. You see 15 urban centers. You see roads running 25 kilometers in perfect straight lines. You see a complete city network that has been invisible for 2,000 years. And you know what the scientific community's reaction will be when you publish this. Do you believe it? Do you trust what you are seeing?
Like, if a colleague showed you those images without the 30 years of fieldwork behind them, would you believe it?
No, I don't think I would. And this is important to admit. If I had not spent 30 years excavating in that valley, if I had not pulled Kilamope ceramics from those platforms with my own hands, if I had not personally walked the ground, I think I would have looked at those LiDAR images and said, this cannot be right. There must be an error in the data processing.
Because the claim is so extraordinary.
Because the claim is so extraordinary. Yes. An urban network of 15 centers, 300 square kilometers, 2,500 years old in the Amazon. That contradicts 50 years of established thinking. Without the fieldwork to ground truth it, without the ceramics, the radiocarbon dates, the stratigraphy, I would have been very skeptical. And this is why we did not publish in 2020. We spent 3 years after receiving the LiDAR data, conducting additional ground surveys, running additional radiocarbon dates, verifying every claim. The paper appeared in January 2024, 3 years after we first saw the images, because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and we needed to be sure.
3 years of making sure. That is scientific rigor.
And you chose wisely. What is your perspective in hindsight if you had published in 2020 without that verification?
It would have been picked apart, every loose thread, every unverified claim, and the skeptics, who were waiting, who were ready, would have used those loose threads to dismiss the entire discovery. By waiting 3 years, by building the evidence base to be essentially unassailable, we gave the discovery the strongest possible foundation. The Upano Valley story will not be walked back. The evidence is too strong.
What happens next? Like, what is the future of this research?
So much. We have barely begun. The 300 square kilometers we surveyed, that is a starting point, not a conclusion. We need more LiDAR coverage across the broader region. We need more excavations to understand the social structures, the governance, the trade connections. We need detailed paleoecological analysis, cores from lake sediments, pollen records, to understand how the Upano Valley people managed their environment across 2,000 years. And beyond the Upano Valley, I would love to see systematic LiDAR coverage of more of the Amazon. I genuinely believe we will find other complexes, other urban networks, other stories waiting to be told. The Amazon is full of history. We are just learning to read it.
Let me take you there. You are standing in the Upano Valley in 500 BCE. The Sangay volcano, smoking gently in the south, lights the horizon at dusk. Around you, earthen platforms rise above the forest floor. From one of the communal houses, the sound of a feast, between ceramic vessels clinking, the smell of chicha brewing, voices rising in conversation. On the road in front of you, in a dash, wide, straight, 10 meters across. A group of people is walking in from the next settlement, 2 hours to the north. They are coming for the gathering. This was a real world, full of real people, planning, building, celebrating, arguing, dreaming. And it was magnificent. Dr. Stéphen Rostain, thank you for giving it back to us.
Thank you. It has been the privilege of my life. Every year in that valley, every fragment of pottery, every image on the LiDAR screen. Incredible, truly incredible.
That was honestly one of the most amazing conversations I've had on this podcast. Cities in the Amazon, 2,500 years old, a priest who found them first and didn't get the credit. Roads straight as rulers through the forest, a scientist who was stubborn enough to spend 30 years proving everyone wrong. This is why history matters. The full story is always bigger than the story we were told.
And the story keeps getting bigger. Stéphen, you said the Amazon is being rewritten in real time. What excites you most about what comes next?
The thing that excites me most, the thing we have not found yet, the discovery that nobody has imagined. The LiDAR flight that reveals the next extraordinary thing. The Amazon is not done surprising us. It has barely begun.
Dr. Stéphen Rostain, Director of Research at France's National Center for Scientific Research. The man who spent 30 years being stubborn in exactly the right place. Remember his name. Remember Pedro Porras, the priest who saw it first. And remember the people of the Upano Valley. The builders, the farmers, the road engineers, the chicha brewers, who built something magnificent 2,500 years ago and waited patiently for the world to notice. Until our next journey through time, keep history alive. What a remarkable journey today. A city hidden for 2,000 years, revealed by technology that would have seemed like magic to its builders. One thing this teaches us: 2, great things are built through long-term vision and strategic investment in the future. That is exactly what our partner Cyprus Real Returns offers. Secure Cyprus real estate with guaranteed 6 to 12% returns, 100% backed by the Cyprus Land Registry. Professional management completely hands-off. With Cyprus tourism booming and property values growing nearly 8% annually, it is an opportunity worth exploring. Visit cyprusrealreturns.com to learn more.